Hey everyone. Okay, so right from the jump, there's one thing I failed to mention last week, which is apparently the anime censored the kiss between Elsie and Justice, but if I'm being honest, this is one of the more minor censorships in the show I'm willing to overlook, because ultimately that might, I think something like that might come down to personal preference of whoever is the director of the episode at the time, because one of the weird truths about Japan is it has a much more conservative outlook when it comes to the idea of romance, and they believe much more in the idea of romantic privacy. And that can kind of, I think in some cases that can bleed into how an adaptation of more romantic scenes that aren't in the shoujo demographic are handled. So it's like one I kind of give a little bit more of a pass to, mainly because, it would have been good to see the kiss. I think I can understand why they didn't do it. That said, though, there on the other side of that coin, though, the one thing that's a little bit odd to me is the reveal we get that Muller's body is entirely Otech, and that in the process of making the augmentations to his own body, he experimented on many human guinea pigs, among those being the Rutherford siblings, aka Jin, Chris, and Clean, which I'll start off by saying credit where it's due for not editing the scene out entirely. And honest to God, the way the anime handled the adaptations of Clean's memories of the events, like the moment where, like the moments of her past where that we see Ivory viewing when she digitizes herself into Clean's mind, that shit was actually handled really damn well. And even in some cases, I think the way that the anime handled the camera work in that moment, actually, I think there was a lot about that I think just in the way the camera work was handled a little bit better than the manga in certain respects. But but for me, so overall, I do think in general the anime did handle the whole scene of like what exactly of Jin and Clean's past with Muller. I think that was overall handled pretty well. Where the weirdness comes in for me, and this is going to sound like such a goddamn nitpick, is how they handled the initial reveal. Like, I'm talking the initial scene where we see, I'm talking the very first scene we see of Muller experimenting, doing his little twisted experiment on the siblings. That's where the weirdness comes in for me, because how they handled the initial reveal, I mean, I guess I shouldn't have expected a whole lot in comparison to what we did get when Ivory digitized herself into Clean's memories, but I think I just had a slightly higher expectation that they would do a little bit more creative, get a little more creative than just doing the bare minimum of copy and pasting the panel, as it were, into what is essentially just a GIF. Like, again, I want to emphasize the anime did pull the whole Muller and the Rutherford siblings scene off. They did it pretty damn well, but it's just that one scene that had me go, it just feels a little bit lazy by comparison to what the memory segment did. I know, again, I'm probably nitpicking on a scene that is mostly great, but it's like, yeah, that first moment didn't leave the best first impression, you could say. I thought they could have gotten a little more creative with it. But while we're on the topic of Muller's situation, though, obviously the episode shows the battle being kind of fought on two separate fronts. The first is obviously Herman and Weiss putting an end to Muller, which even to this day is still the most satisfying thing on the planet, to see that psychotic asshole finally get his just dues, and seeing Herman like just get the closure for both herself and so many others. The good doctor is wronged. It was so magnificent to just revisit this again. But then we also have Ivory stepping up to help Clean confront her trauma of the past and comforting her by it, but by digitizing herself inside Clean's mind. And honestly, again, looking back on both of these moments side by side is rather interesting, because as many of my fellow manga readers know, there was a narrative decision Mashima made in one of the recent arcs of the manga that I was not the biggest fan of. And while I still think there was lost potential in that decision. Looking back on this whole incident with Muller does give me perspective of why Machinima didn't follow through with that decision either. As, in a way, you could say the crux of the whole Muller problem, the whole Muller problem in regards to the effect it had on the Rutherford siblings is much more about Cleen than it ever was about Jin. Like, Cleen was absolutely traumatized, but was absolutely traumatized by Prince Muller's actions. And even though Jin suffered just as much for it, and probably still has his own demons from that day that he's still battling, ultimately he did find the resolve to keep moving forward, whereas Cleen was just stuck in this endless grip of trauma and fear. She was stuck permanently in her past and the trauma she suffered because of that. Because of that, I think it is. So because of that, I think this is more. So I think because of that, this you could definitely say that this definitely is it. The ultimate crux of the situation is definitely more for Cleen to finally put her past to bed and just be at peace with herself and what had happened to her. I think that's ultimately what I think that's the kind of thing that's how I've come to interpret it now anyway. So we also touch base a little bit more with Elsie and Justice, but it's mostly them making their escape from the planet. But it's through that where we also get a conversation between Holy and Justice, which is kind of funny in knowing what I know, because Holy telling Justice to let Elsie go could also be seen as her laying kind of the groundwork for her own plans that are going to happen much later in the series. Not this season, mind you, but in probably like a season 3 or 4 or something like that. With that said, let's talk about Zenolith, because at the beginning of the episode we get a very intriguing reveal for him. The reason for Ziggy's turn to evil is because he's fallen to the dark side of Satan gravity, once again mirroring a lot of Star Wars with the parallel of Anakin's fall as Vader. But also revealing to us that, yeah, there does come with a cost to the power Shiki wields, which is that if he's not careful, he could very well end up being consumed as Ziggy was. And as a manga reader, I don't know how to feel about this reveal nowadays, because this little exchange between Shiki and Zenolith is great foreshadowing in terms of another big reveal with Ziggy that's, again, happening much later in the series. But as far as the bit about the dark side of Satan gravity, that's where things get a little complicated, because while I don't want to say it played no part in Ziggy's turn, as it's going to be revealed much later in the series, that's not the only reason he turned. And in that respect, and the way this second reveal is handled, it does feel like one kind of negates the other a little bit. It still kind of works, but it is one of those things where it feels like Machinima needed to smooth out some of the rougher edges in the execution of it, so to speak. But speaking of foreshadowing of events, though, you'll notice through the episode that Creed seemed overly attached to and protective of Homura. And obviously it is played up as the guy's down bad and got a crush on her, but it is funny looking back on even these scenes now and me saying there is a legitimate storied connection there, albeit a slightly more indirect one. But it is still, again, it's one of those things where I don't know if it was intentional or not, but he did set up a connection between Homura and Creed at that time. We also get a little bit more characterization for Zenolith in this episode, as we learn he is straight up Yoda. Like, as however long he lived before transferring his consciousness to his robot body, he definitely grew to be a lot more carefree and goofy in his old age, but still having that more serious edge to it. Like, he's just kind of a total goofball now at this point. Also, as an aside, I never really cared all that much for the little girl and her robot friend when reading this arc in the manga for the first time, but not gonna lie, the anime, to its credit, did have me choked up a little bit over the tragedy of the little girl not really being able to reunite with her robot Mimi again, because yeah, you realize even if she gets off, even if things play out okay after that point, it's like, even depending on how things go from here, she's still gonna be lost without her friend. Like, she's likely to be alone now. In fact, I like how Rebecca this final line at the end of the episode really kind of sums it up great, which is, for better or worse, the coexistence between man and robot on Foresta has kind of been changed forever. It just depends on what form that takes. But yeah, guys, that's pretty much all I got for this review. If you enjoyed the video, like, comment, subscribe, follow me on Twitter, Analyst Crunchyroll, be sure to notification bell, hit the subscribe button, and just share it around, guys. Dark Knight of Anime, signing off. Later, everyone.